Hello and welcome to this Archives of Iowa Broadcasting oral history interview. Today is the 15th of November, 2021. Our guest today is Kelly Neff, and he's a face you might not know, but you will certainly know the voice when you hear it. Longtime radio, you can't even say personality because that's not even accurate, Kelly, because you've got such a broad array of experience. Let's, I guess, start at the beginning. Where were you born and where'd you go to school?
Okay, I was born in Waterloo, and as a good Catholic boy, I attended St. Mary's Grade School and Columbus High School. And that's actually where I got my start in radio, was at high school. I don't know if you need to know the whole story or not, but I was broke one day, as most high school kids were at that time, and wanted to go see a football game. Columbus was playing at Waterloo West. And when it was a home game, I had a pass, I could get in, but on the road games, you had to pay your way in. Well, I didn't have any money. So I called up the radio station in town because I knew they were covering the game. Asked them if they needed any help. And they said, oh yeah, our spotter is not here today. So I went and I spotted the football game, and they liked it so much, I helped them carry the equipment back to the station, and they hired me. And from then on, I just started working, and I've never stopped.
What station was that you called?
That was KWWL Radio, which is now KWLO Radio. Lee Stevens was the play-by-play guy. He then went to the University of Wisconsin, but he got me started, and I spent the rest of that football season shooting film for TV, because they had a TV station too, Channel 7 in Waterloo. And I went to do some film, and that's the days before videotape. It was actually film. I don't know if it was 16 millimeter or what it was, I can't remember, but I had to get the film developed, which means that most of the time I could only take film of the first quarter because I had to get it back to the station and get it developed. Then you have to edit the whole thing, and then you had to write the script for the 10 o'clock news and make sure everything fit in however much time they gave you, 60 seconds or 90 seconds or whatever. And that's how I got my start in both radio and TV, although I never was on camera on TV, but that's one of the jobs I had, and it got me started with radio.
So how is it that radio won out over TV? Because you're kind of you could have gone either direction. What was it that drew you to radio?
All the years listening to radio, and the fact that in the early 60s, what I was just telling you happened, I graduated in 67. So in the early 60s, my dad worked at John Deere, and came home one day and said that he worked with a guy named Bob Black. And I said, Bob Black? There's a disc jockey on the radio. And I'm like 10 years old. There's a disc jockey on the radio named Bob Black. And then my dad said, oh yeah, that's the same guy. He does that on weekends. So then I got all excited because I've been listening to radio for years. And Dad took me down to the radio station, set it up. And of course, then, like they say, the rest is history. And I got to see a real live radio station and a real live disc jockey. And then I just kind of caught the bug there.
So 1967 is when you graduated from Columbus. So straight into working full-time, part-time in radio?
I was working, this would have been the fall of 66 when I had that football gig. And I worked all the way through the winter, and it went into basketball, and I had the same duties. And then I met a guy named Don Timmerman, who's in, last I heard, he was still in Cedar Falls. And he was a teacher at the Professional Institute of Broadcasting in Independence, Iowa. I was in the first class, daytime class, that the guy who worked at KOUR, he owned KOUR Radio in Independence. And he started up a broadcast school. I was in there with two guys from John Deere. They were, I don't know if they were on strike at the time or these guys were just on vacation, but I was one of three guys in that class. Don Timmerman would pick me up every day in Waterloo and take me over to Independence, and we'd go through school. And he taught us how to do interviews, on the street interviews, and be a disc jockey and be a newsman and do sports and stuff like that. So it was like an 8-week course. And at the end, drove us to Davenport, where we got our FCC license. I don't think you need those now, but back then you needed an FCC license. And so all three of us passed. And then I got to send out some applications, and in 1968 started working in Austin, Minnesota as a real live 18-year-old disc jockey.
Well, we got to go back to this Independence thing. I grew up in Jessup. I mean, I'm like 3 miles from, I could see Independence. You mean I could have gone to broadcast school in Independence
Yeah.
and not have to go to Wartburg? Who knew? I did
Yeah.
not know that school existed. How long did that school of broadcasting go on?
Well, a lot of years after that, I met a guy at the state basketball tournament in Des Moines, and I can't remember his name, but he's the owner of the station in Mount Pleasant, and found out that he went to that school as well. And he graduated in 1971. So it at least went those 4 years.
So tell me the name of the school again. I want to make sure I got it right.
The Professional Institute of Broadcasting.
The PIB. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you go to, you said Austin, Minnesota for that job.
Uh-huh.
What was the call letters and what was your assignment?
Okay. I went to KAUS, and it's still called KAUS now. My job was to be a disc jockey. It's a rock and roll station, and a disc jockey Tuesday through Sunday, kind of an odd schedule, but I would do the 6 to midnight shift, 5 to midnight on Saturdays and Sundays. In fact, I was thinking the other day about some of the other people that work there, and I can't remember any of them because I would get there after 5 o'clock and everybody else was gone. And so I worked the 6 to midnight. They signed off at midnight then. I'm sure they're on 24 hours now, but they signed off at midnight. And I did that 1968 until it was time to go in the Navy. And it was a good place to be.
Did you have a radio name? Did you have an on-air name?
No, I used my real name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So into the Navy, did you tell the Navy what you had as a vocation and hope that you could be the Good Morning Vietnam Robin Williams impersonator?
Yeah, but they didn't seem to care. There was one day in boot camp where they came around and said, okay, here's what you're going to do the rest of your 4 years. And they gave you a whole list of things you could be, a cook or, whatever you wanted to be. So I looked over the list and I saw where it said radio. So I signed up for radio. Well, what I found out was they sent you to radio school to learn the Morse code and that type of radio. I should have chosen journalism. That would have been newspaper, radio, TV. So they trained me in Morse code and communications and radio that way, and assigned me to my first assignment in Adak, Alaska. And on the weekends, they had a base radio station. So I got a gig working, Saturday and Sunday afternoons, because my job was only Monday through Friday. And stayed with it a little bit. And so it wasn't like working full time, but I kept my feet into it. And the same thing happened when I went overseas too, and did a little more radio work over there in Ethiopia.
All right. Kelly, I'm going to have you, this is a live interview all the time. So I'm just going to have you sit back just a little bit. I know you're so excited to talk about everything today. We've got you going. So the Navy career of the technical side, did that help you with equipment that maybe broke down after? Like, because it is when you're on the road, you're in Dubuque and you're supposed to do a game and the headset's broken. Did any of those skills translate to one another?
I still don't know how to fix anything. As long as there was a Radio Shack around, I was fine. I would get to those like in Dubuque, and I'd get there like 2 hours early in case something like that happened, and I still had a chance to go get something. But I don't know an ohm from a resistor or anything.
But you do know your dots and your dashes.
Yes, I over the years I do know SOS, but I forgot everything else.
Yeah. So. Okay, so after you was it 4 full years in the Navy, Kelly? To
the day.
Okay, then what?
Then I took a little time off. I'm in Ethiopia. They fly you home. They pay you so much per mile to New York City, and then a little less per mile to get to your home, which was way more than money than I needed. So I stopped off in Paris and London and got a little vacation in, and then I went home. And that was in late September, early October of 72. And there was a brand new radio station opening up on October 31st of 72 in Waterloo, which, just landed right in my lap. I went there and applied for it and got a job and started working there and stayed there for a couple of years. So it really worked out well getting out of the Navy when I did, and then going to work right in my hometown at a brand new station.
And which station was that?
That was KLEU. It's not that anymore. It was a daytime station only, and I think it still is. But we played what was called middle of the road music. We wouldn't play the Rolling Stones, but we'd play Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet and stuff like that. And some of the pop bands of the kind like Bread and people that really fit that format. But I did a disc jockey show and news. I was a news director. We had a news director who, he was a Jewish guy, and he went on vacation to Israel and never came back. He never came back. He loved it so much in Israel, he just stayed there. And so they made me the news director, and I got a little experience doing that, which I had not done before, which, that turned out to be a good thing. And I stayed there until 74. Then I went to Florida.
And went to Florida in 74?
Mm-hmm.
Was your thought to be an on-air disc jockey, or did the news bug bite?
No, just a disc jockey. In fact, I got his job at doing an evening shift at a country station, KWYOU, You and Your Country it was, and got to play all the Mickey Gilley, Waylon Jennings. It was actually pretty good country at that time. That's 1974. It's way past the Webb Pierce, Buck Owens era, and now they had country good Willie Nelson and people like that, and I enjoyed that, but it was minimum wage job. And so I could not afford to live and pay tourist prices in Florida on a minimum wage job, even though I got free rent from a guy I was in the Navy with. He let me stay with him for free. So I found a job working in Centerville, Iowa, and went up there full time.
All right.
I was in 70.
Before we get to Centerville, let's talk about your radio career a little bit as a disc jockey. What did you was there a character that you tried to do, or did you just try to be Kelly from Waterloo, Iowa, wherever you were at?
Yeah, I didn't pattern myself after anybody, just was myself. When I was in Centerville, I did an afternoon shift, and there's just me. I mean, trying to relate to the audience and enjoying myself. And I did that same thing in Tampa at that country station, and I didn't try to emulate anybody or didn't try to sound like anybody. It was just being me.
You weren't trying to be the real Don Steele or something like that?
No. Or Arnie Woo Woo Ginsburg or anybody like that. I had no gimmicks like that. No sound effects.
Was there somebody that you emulated that you wanted to be like?
No, not really. No, not really. I mean, I loved listening to Wolfman Jack, but I knew I couldn't do that. There's only one Wolfman Jack, but I listened to, like anybody else just starting out in radio, and no matter what field you're in, you listen to other people who are in your same area of interest and try to learn from them. So I suppose subconsciously I'm picking up little things from disc jockeys. We could pick up WOW in Omaha. We could pick up other stations, and I would listen to hear how they did it. And I grew not to like the pukers. The pukers are not good. Hey, oh yeah, that sort of stuff. So I stayed away from that. And I found out even when I was doing sports, you can actually learn more from the people who aren't any good than you can from the people who are good, because you learn what not to do, and you just eliminate what not to do, and all of a sudden you know what to do. So that's how I learned.
Well, the easy bit for me to do right here, Kelly, is to say, so when you had a song coming up, I mean, you hit the ramp or the post, you had 12 seconds. Did you pre-work that 12, or were you one of the light went on and you just snap came to you and you did what you did?
I suppose there were times when I prepared something, but most of the time I just winged it. I had nothing written. I didn't write out any scripts or anything. Some ramps you can't talk. I mean, try doing that to the theme from Shaft, which is 1 minute and 57 seconds. You're not going to get anything done.
You can do like two newscasts in that time.
Yeah, I just winged it. That's all.
So did you ever have a program director or anything come in and say, Kelly, you can't do this, or you got to do more of this before Centerville? Let's go the pre-Centerville era. Program directors that maybe gave you good advice, or the don't do that advice?
Well, the best advice as a disc jockey that I ever got was at KAUS in Austin. Roger Burke, who used to be at KWWL in Waterloo, was the program director. And my very first night, this was in January of 1968. And of course, he's going to be listening because he just hired me. So we come out of the 6 o'clock news and I play a song called Some Velvet Morning by Nancy Sinatra and Lee Hazelwood, real slow melodic thing. Phone call comes in. I answer and he says, no, don't start the hour with a slow song. People have just heard 5 minutes of depressing news. You need to start off with something bouncy and cheery. And I did that. I learned right there and I never did that again. And it was just that one time.
You gotta hit them hard, upbeat tune. Oh, I love it. Have you ever heard that leaked audio of Casey Kasem recording his top 40 and he's like, how can I come out of an up-tempo record and do this dead dog bit? I can't do that. Kind of that same type of advice, right?
Yeah, that's perfect advice. It's great advice. I learned from that, and never again did I ever come out of the news with Honey by Bobby Goldsboro. I'd come out with Lady Madonna by the Beatles instead, and it really worked. I mean, people do, they may not think that they're depressed after 5 minutes of news, but they do need something to perk them up. And so he was right on the button there.
All right, we're in Centerville, Iowa now in the mid 1970s. Is that right?
Right. 74, I started there. Yeah.
What are we doing?
I started doing just an afternoon show. I did one of those swap and trade shows, yes. those things, the whatever they called it. Yeah, it was
radio tradio, buy, sell, and trade.
Yeah, buy, sell, those types of things. I did that. I started my shift at 1. That was on from at noon. It started at noon. They ran for an hour. Then I just played music until 6 o'clock, and then I was done. Except that's where I got into sports. I always wanted this to be a disc jockey. And Mike O'Connor, who was at Channel 7 for a long time, and he's now down in Centerville. In fact, he's the mayor of Centerville at the present time. He got me into doing play-by-play. And there was an interesting story there because Mike was from Grinnell. And you know how you find a good doctor or a good dentist and you still move out of town, but you still want to use them? Well, he had a dental appointment one Friday at 2 o'clock. Well, Mike was scheduled to come back to Centerville and broadcast a girls' basketball game at Moravia High School with Molly Bolin playing at that time. She was a big Iowa cornet. She was Molly Van Benthuizen at that time. But anyway, he couldn't make it. The dentist had an emergency, some kind of accident, and so Mike was not going to get out of there until 5 or 5:30. So he knew I liked sports. I'd never done sports. I told him I had because he asked me if I'd ever done sport. Oh yeah, I can do that. So I got the equipment. Moravia is 10 miles away. So I went up and set up the equipment. That's my very first basketball play-by-play. And then of course, 5,000 of them followed after that, but that was my very first one. Growing up in Waterloo, and this is an interesting story because they didn't have girls basketball till the mid-70s in bigger cities. It was 6-on-6, which I had never seen. I didn't know the rules. And here I am broadcasting a 6-on-6 girls basketball game that I didn't know. And the funny thing is, Moravia's gym is so small, they set me underneath the scoreboard. I could not see the scoreboard. I had to turn around and look at the scoreboard to see how much time was and what the score was. But I figured, hey, it's basketball. I'd seen basketball. I can do this. So like all announcers would do, I took the roster. I went to the coaches. They were playing Central Decatur. And Ivan Hankins was the coach of Moravia. And I took a pen and the roster and said, can you circle your starters? So he circled 6 names. And I thought basketball is only 5 names. I didn't know there was 6. So I thought I would just put a substitute in there. So I'll just go with it. And the other coach did the same thing. So I thought, wow, maybe that's the custom. Maybe that's how they do it. So I went back, we got on the air, and there's no jump ball. I thought, I didn't say anything on the air because I didn't want to sound like I was ignorant. And I said to myself, well, what in the world's going on? They just gave this ball to this girl and she got to play the ball in. And she dribbled twice and stopped, and the defender was right there, and she's holding the ball. And I'm thinking to myself, there's the ball, just grab it. Well, the rule is that's a foul if you do that. And I didn't know that. So I faked my way through that whole basketball game. And Mike said, oh, that was very good. You did a good job, because he was in town by then. But boy, I was frazzled after that because I had no idea. They shot and scored, and the official took the ball and threw it to the other end of the court. I thought, what in the world is going on? I had no clue. But eventually I learned the rules, and did my 5,000 games and really got to enjoy it.
Well, you saw some good 6-on-6 basketball players over time. And how would you describe calling a 6-on-6 game versus a 5-on-5 game?
Well, once I learned the rules and found out what they can do, it was a little more exciting. Now, you hold the ball and you had to pass it after 2 dribbles. And I didn't like the fact that these 3 girls at the other end never got any credit because they couldn't score any points and they never got in the box score. But it was, and when they went to 5-on-5, it was a little trend. There were a couple of years in there where they did them both. They had a 5-on-5 champion and a 6-on-6 champion. And I got to enjoy both of them. I mean, I'd been used to the 5-on-5, obviously, for boys basketball. So it really wasn't that much different once they made the switch.
Okay. So you do, you're in Centerville, pinch hitting, and it begins play-by-play. How did you start expanding doing the sports then in Centerville?
Well, we had an FM station too. And so the Centerville High School football games, which Mike did himself, were on the AM. And at that time, they were a Christian FM station. So we didn't run any sports at the time. Later we did. But he sent me to Corydon, Wayne Community High School, because there are a lot of sponsors in Corydon in that area. And we tape delayed a football game and ran it Saturday morning. I don't think any station does that anymore, but a lot of stations used to do that. And so that was my gig. I would go wherever Wayne played. And fortunately, they are a very good football program there. And so I took a tape recorder and I recorded it. And, you don't fill halftime or any of that, just recorded the play-by-play and played it back the next day. So I got to do football there, and I knew the rules of football, so that was no problem. It wasn't like 6-on-6 football or anything. And
well, now they play 8-man, I think, at Wayne. Yeah, but
that's kind of like indoor stuff. I mean,
yes.
The rules are really wild, wild. But I never got to broadcast an 8-player football game. So I was in Centerville, and I started doing some of those things, and we did baseball and softball and basketball live, and I got to do a little more every year. And I stayed there for 5 years and to learn how to do play-by-play.
At that point, did you say my next job should be sports play-by-play related, or were you still thinking, I like this disc jockey thing?
Well, I liked them both, but I really did like the play-by-play. And it was really quite by accident how I got the job in Cedar Falls, which eventually led to the University of Northern Iowa. There was a story in 1979, and I'm not sure anybody remember, there was a theft of money from the Appanoose County Treasurer's Office, a big story. And people from our news director was over there getting all the information, and I was answering the phone because stations from all over the state were asking for information about this story. And I would feed them whatever interviews or news bites we had. And one of the last ones that called me that day, and I mean, that was a harrowing day. That was like 8 hours of station. I mean, there must have been 100 stations that called us, was KXEL in Waterloo. A guy by the name of Darwin Postian called and wanted an interview with whomever. And since being from Waterloo, I spent a couple of minutes talking to him, and he said, hey, did you know that the KCFI in Cedar Falls is going from a daytime only to a full-time station? I said, no, I hadn't heard that. And he says, yeah, you should give him a call and see it. So I did, and talked to Jim Mudd, and he hired me. And that's how I got to Cedar Falls, working full-time up there as a disc jockey and doing all the Cedar Falls high school football games. Somebody else was doing UNI at the time. But when I got to Cedar Falls, I started doing the UNI games. I did those for 7 years. And so that's how I got it. It was purely by accident. If the Appanoose County Treasurer's Office hadn't been robbed, I never would have talked to Darwin Postian, and I never would have found out that this was happening until it was probably too late and they hired somebody else. So, it's all where you are at the time, I guess.
Luck isn't all just random. I mean, it's opportunity. You knew enough to say, KXEL, I know those call letters. Hey, I'm from. How are things at Lynn's service station there on? What's going on?
Sure.
So this is 79 was the robbery. Was it about 80 then when you started at KCFI?
August of 79. I was within a month and a half. I started.
Right. Okay.
I went up for an interview and they hired me, actually doubled my salary of what I was making in Centerville, which I thought was great. I was moving back to my hometown, which I thought was great. And so I started in August of 1970, but then there was a glitch. The full-time license had been delayed. Mm-hmm. So now what do? It's football season. We've already promised we would do all the Cedar Falls High School football games and the UNI games. So what do? Well, the UNI games we could do pretty well because they were in the daytime. They were Saturday afternoon. But Friday night, well, I'd have to go to Fort Dodge, Mason City, wherever the Big Eight was playing. And then we'd do a highlight show on Saturday morning. But that only lasted one season. And in March of 80, they got the full-time license. And the first thing we did was the entire state basketball tournament for boys in 1980. Did every game. There were 4 or 5 games a day. Come Thursday, I lost my voice. My mom called on the phone and said, go down to the nearest drugstore and buy some honey and start gargling like mad. And so that was great advice too, because I was able to get by the whole tournament. And there was like, what do they have, 24 games in a week? And I did them all. So, but then I started doing those all the time. Then we started doing the UNI games live. And, that was a great 7 years.
So like you said about the Radio Shack being close by for your equipment, it's good to have a drugstore close by to get your honey in case.
Yes, to get the honey and water and mix it all up and gargle. And I know Jim Mudd, that's the first thing we did. That's the state basketball tournament. He listened to the very first day and called me up and gave me a raise right away. I was already making twice as much money as I made in Centerville. Now I thought, hey, this is a great gig. If I can do that every week, that'd be great. Too bad there wasn't more state tournaments. I could have gotten a raise every week. But and during the off season, I did I did the morning show with somebody else named Stan Thomas, and we got new owners. Jim Mudd sold the station, but he sold it to this father and son out of Illinois who came in and changed it to country music. And actually, this little tiny KCFI station started out real low in the ratings. They brought them up to the top 3 or 4. And we would run contests and everything, listener involvement and everything that involved the listener. And it ended up being a very successful station.
Who were those new owners?
Ken Hamilton and his son Ron Hamilton. I think Ron, last I heard, was still in Ncaa. Ken died a number of years ago, but they came from Illinois, and they were big on sports and big on country music, because there was a country station in Oelwein. KWLO was a country station. And so we challenged them with more contests, more promotions and stuff. And we actually went past them in the ratings and actually knocked a couple of the big Waterloo stations down a little bit, because they were doing, and then eventually for some reason the station couldn't sustain it. And I started there in 79. I was there 15 years. So in 94, I left there. So
in 94. Okay. So you're there that whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The radio station and the promotion side of things, did you sense also that, I mean, yes, you mentioned listener involvement, but being local was probably a big part of it too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We did all kinds of, we did a coaches show, a local coaches show. Some stations will do that like during football season and then they'll stop. And some will do it through the basketball season and then they'll stop. We did it 52 weeks a year, every Saturday morning. I don't care what season it was. I mean, if there's nothing going on in June, we still did it. We would do specialty shows. Like I would bring in Murray Weir, the legendary basketball coach at Waterloo East, and do a show with him. We would go on location during UNI football spring practices and broadcast it from the Unidome. We needed to be visual. We needed to be out there in the crowd so they could see us doing these things. And we just had a ball. We would bring in the groundskeeper for the Waterloo Indians baseball team as a guest. We'd bring in my play-by-play counter guy, Larry Van Ord, and he would be a guest. We'd usually have 3 or 4 guests, and we'd just pass the microphone around for an hour, and people really seemed to like that. They really did. And then when I left, they stopped that. They didn't do it. They still don't do it, I don't think.
The coaches show is a staple in still a lot of small radio stations. I don't hear it in the big stations like I used to. That community involvement, I mean, Cedar Falls was a big small community. I mean, would you say that I mean, it's a college town, but it still feels like I might know people in Cedar Falls, like I would in Centerville or Mount Pleasant.
I left Cedar Falls, KCFI in '94, and there's still, what's that, 27 years ago, and there's still people that contact me every so often, or I see them up at, I go to Cedar Falls for like Sturgis Falls celebration, and people I knew back then, hey, it's just like I never left, which in a sense, and we can get to that later, I'm still doing stuff for KCFI. But, it's those things where, how it used to be with disc jockeys, personality radio, which really isn't there anymore. People would get so familiar with their favorite disc jockeys. I mean, they let you in their bedroom, they let you in your kitchen, they let you in their bathroom, they let you in their living room, they let you in your cars. They got to know you, but you don't know them, obviously. But they see you on the street and they're like long lost friends. They know who you are. The same way with basketball. I would do games like at Cedar Falls High School. Incidentally, we always used to do the road game instead of the home game on basketball. We figured if people are at home, they could go to the home game. We'll do the road game. But when I did home games, there's 500, 600 people in the stands, and they're all looking up and they see me and Gary Wickman, my color commentator, and they know who we are. We don't know them, but after the game, they'll walk up and they'll slap you on the back and, who are you? I don't know you, but that, that familiarity, if you get out, people know you and they feel better. They feel better.
How would you describe your play-by-play style then? I mean, were you doing I guess it's the same as your disc jockeyness. Are you doing it for one person, or are you doing it for a little more masses?
My wife and I talked about this the other day. We went to Cedar Falls, and on the way back, we were talking about doing this interview. And I said, I'm going to point out a fact that a lot of current play-by-play people don't really do, is that you don't talk to a mass of people. You talk to one. There might be 20 people in the room listening, but you're not talking to 20 people. You're talking to one. So that's why I've never said, thanks to all of you for listening. No, not all of you. Thanks to you for listening. And I never say, I don't know about another example, but you make it a personal thing. You make it a one-on-one thing because only one person is listening at a time. And I've talked to people before about, there are announcers, play-by-play announcers, or even disc jockeys or what, where you like them more than you like this other guy. But why? Why do you like them better? Because in your mind, you don't know it, but that's what they do. They don't treat you like a whole, 1,000 people. They treat you as an individual. And those are the best ones you can have. And that's always been my philosophy, is to do it that way.
Do you think that that's more of a radio versus TV thing? Or do you think that both can do it?
They both can do it, but I think you're right. I think it's more of a radio, because radio is more personal. Because in radio, you have to use your imagination. I mean, I can describe what's going on. They can't see it, so they have to see it in their mind. So they're more active listening to the radio than you are watching TV. And of course, in TV, you're watching, 1 million people are watching, and you know it. A radio, you never really know who's listening, or if anybody's listening for that matter. But I think, yeah, it probably is more of a radio thing than a TV thing.
1994, change in Kelly Neff's life. What happened next?
Then I went across town to KWLO. They had been trying to hire me to do their play-by-play. And they had a guy, his name was Bob Bakken, who was doing it. He was from Sioux City, and he had been trying for years to get back to Sioux City. Well, in 1994, as it worked out, KCFI had slipped a bit. And so they decided they, aren't going to put a whole lot of effort into it. At the same time, Bob Bakken got an offer from Sioux City. Again, this is like the Darwin Poston thing in Centerville. I'm right there having lunch with Don Moorhead, the general manager of KWLO. And I had turned him down 2 or 3 times. I still wanted to do the UNI games and all that stuff. But by 1994, I wasn't doing the UNI games anymore. Somebody else, KOEL, had started doing them. But he wanted me to come and join it. And finally, the opportunity arose where Bob Bakken left. And so I stepped in right at the perfect time and started doing their play-by-play. And meanwhile, KOKZ changed to an oldies format. And so I was doing games on KWLO and doing a midday oldies shift on the FM KOKZ. And so everything just worked perfectly.
You didn't want to be a part of the hot rock at KOKZ era. You were glad you came at the oldies era. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, they changed it. They changed one weekend that they played for 48 hours straight. They played the song "Cool Change" by Little River Band because we called ourselves Cool 105.7. They don't call it that anymore, but man, did that station take off. Holy cow. There was, for like 5 straight books, and maybe some of the people watching don't know what a book is, but you get a ratings book, and in some markets it's every quarter you get those, but in smaller markets you get them maybe once a year, maybe twice. But we zoomed to number one. I mean, we had a 57 share. Everybody else was 20 or less, and we were just kicking butt. I mean, we were really kicking butt, and that stayed that way for 4 or 5 books in a row until they hired a consultant to come in to see if anything was wrong with the station. They immediately changed the format and they dropped from number 1 to number 6 in the rankings. And I'm not sure they've ever come back from that. And that happened when I was there. They made the change. They changed to urban oldies. They were just rock and roll oldies before. So in urban oldies, it's more of a black oriented thing because the consultant said, well, Black Hawk County has 12% black. Let's target them. And I said, well, what about the other 88%? They said, well, we can get more. So they dropped all the Beach Boys, all the Jan and Dean, all the Buddy Holly, all those things, kept maybe 2 or 3 Beatles songs. All the rest were Al Green, McFadden and Whitehead, obscure album cuts, and bam, it's like somebody handed them an anchor. And so I just said, no, that's it. So I went back into the newsroom then and did news and play-by-play and I wasn't a disc jockey anymore after that. Well, I haven't been since, but at that time I wasn't. No, I just thought it was a bad mistake.
I remember the switch to a cool change. We had that on in the college bathroom on our radio in there. And it was just fun that whole weekend. I mean, all of us communication students discussing that cool change. A cool change is coming. You know, and that's all it would be every like 3 seconds. There's sometimes in my life a missing. It's
very
the
good.
thought of being alone. Oh, I remember that well, Kelly. News then and sports and play-by-play you're doing then. How long are you staying there in Waterloo?
Waterloo, I was there until 1999. That's when the station, they had 4 stations. They had KOKZ, they had KWLO, they had KXEL, and they had Rock 108, all in the same building, all owned by the same company. By then, Rock 108 was the number 1 station. They play the hard stuff by groups you've never heard of. And our station kind of fell down. KXEL was still pretty good. I was doing the morning news. We called it AM Update, which was kind of nice. Dave McCormick came up with that. He was the morning guy. And he said, well, we're an AM station and we do this update in the morning, so we'll call it AM Update. And it was very popular. Everybody, I mean, we did 3 straight hours of local news every morning from 6 to 9. That was a tough period because I had to get up about 4 o'clock every morning. I got back from Dubuque at 1 o'clock that morning and you get up at 4 o'clock. So I decided I would move from Cedar Falls to the old Russell Lamson building in Waterloo just so I could be 3 blocks away and I wouldn't have to get up at 3:30. I could get up at 4 instead. So we really did well. There was a fire one day in downtown Waterloo, in our block, not in our building, but in our block. But they evacuated everybody. So we had to broadcast outside the whole 3-hour news with me. And Dave McCormick would do the news. Charlie Francisco would do the weather. And then I'd do all the sports. And you did 3 segments an hour. Top of the hour till 20, 20 to 40, and then 40 to the top of the hour. And to do that, you had to have a really good news staff because you had to rotate, all these stories. You couldn't just do from 6:20 to 6:40 what you did from 6 o'clock to 6:20. because people were listening to the whole show. So we had a great news staff. We had like 7 or 8 people doing news full time. I don't know if any station does that anymore, and certainly not then. Maybe WHO, maybe WMT, but we were one of the few that still did that. And so I did that until 1999, when the new owners, called Bayhackle Communications, came in and decided, we don't want our salespeople out knocking on doors trying to get advertising for high school football. So we're going to drop all our sports. So here I am, a sports guy with no sports to do. So I made a change and left in 1999. I went to Iowa City and started working there, doing play-by-play and a weekend oldies show. But it was a fun time in Waterloo and Cedar Falls, and I've never had another full-time job up there yet. I mean, I do some part-time stuff now, but then Iowa City became full-time, and I came down there.
And that was at KCJJ?
Uh-huh.
And describe that station, because that station's a little different too. I don't think everybody knows about them.
Little, I'm not sure. Lot would probably be the word. It's a lot different than most radio stations. But I will say one thing, at least they still have some personality going. So many radio stations don't do that. You tune into stations and they're yakking about their personal lives and what they did this weekend, and they're not relating to the listener at all. But at least these guys do. It's not my cup of tea, but at least these guys do that. But the guy who owns the station, I worked with at KLEU. That's how I got to know him way back when in the early 70s. So when they at Waterloo decided that they didn't want to do sports anymore, I did what, I don't even know if people do this anymore. I put a tape together, started sending them out to different radio stations. And I had remembered that this guy had bought an Iowa City station. So I sent him a tape. I never knew what would come up with it. So one night in November, it might have even been December of 79 or 99, when I was on my way just to watch a UNI basketball game, and the phone rang just as I was leaving the apartment. So I answered it, and it was him, and he said, we're thinking of changing our play-by-play guy. Would you be interested? So I went down that Saturday and had an interview, and they hired me on the spot. And in January 2nd, 2000, I started a brand new job in a brand new town. It was fun. I was doing all the high school. And people who follow sports in Iowa, and even I knew that at the time, Iowa City is probably, maybe not as much now, but back then it was the hot spot to be. I mean, City High, West High, Regina, they were winning every state championship in every sport. Then you had Clear Creek Amana and Solon and the Iowa Mennonite School. They were winning everything. And what a great gig to be doing play-by-play at a place, like that, where you have a state championship caliber team in every sport every season. And not like Waterloo. Waterloo wasn't quite like.
So you got to know that you got to go back to the state tournament a couple of times where you made an impression before.
Yeah, usually you would stay there like the whole week, because the smaller schools would play on Monday and Tuesday, and that's where you had IMS or Solon or Lone Tree, and then the bigger school, then Regina would come in the middle of the week. Now you got City High and West High or whoever come in. You just stay there all week and sometimes do a couple of games a day, and tons of listeners. Now they televise every semifinal, but they didn't do that back then. They only televised the final, so people were listening to the radio all the time. You have great Tim Dwight and people like that were in Iowa City at the time, and Iowa City West basketball, boys basketball would be there every year. It was a great gig to have, and living in a Big Ten town was fun. It was really fun.
So at what point did you start dipping your toe in with the University of Iowa?
That would have been after we moved back from Florida.
Okay.
That would have been 2000, 7 or so, 2006, when I got back. And just to backtrack a little bit, the last 2 athletic directors at the University of Iowa, I worked with at UNI. So Bob Bowlesby knew who I was. Then Gary Barta came in. He was the director of the Unidome operations under Bob Bowlesby. So they all knew me. And so they said, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. So I became the PA announcer for University of Iowa field hockey. I had never seen field hockey before, but I learned fast. And then I did 1 year of play-by-play for University of Iowa volleyball. And I have been, since we moved back from Florida, done the PA for University of Iowa softball. I don't do any football, I don't do any basketball, but I do all of those. Then they had me fill in for University of Iowa baseball PA. But the only play-by-play I did for him was the volleyball 1 year. Actually, I was hired to do the PA, and they had another guy doing play-by-play. But they thought he was better at PA than I was, and I was better at play-by-play than he was. So we just switched jobs. But that was fun, and they haven't been that good in volleyball since. But I've enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed it. And I still do. Like I do still do the softball.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll come back to Iowa City. Let's quickly touch what Florida was, because you had a lot of stuff you were doing on there. Why'd you go to Florida?
Went to Florida because my wife found a job down there. And I figured, well, I can go down there and find work. I mean, and I did. In fact, Bud Legg from the Iowa High School Athletic Association, I don't know if you know Bud.
Yeah.
But he liked me. He was a fan of mine. And so I told him we were going a state baseball tournament just before we left. I said, I'm going down to Florida. I'm moving out of Florida. And so I said, well, why don't you stop by in Gainesville, because we were going to the Orlando area. I had to go right through Gainesville. I said, why don't you go down there and just check in with the Florida High School Athletic Association and see if they have anything. Little did I know that he wrote a glowing letter of recommendation. I didn't even ask for it. So by the time we got to Gainesville and stopped in to see a guy named Seth Polanski, he was ready to hire me on the spot. And he did. He had never met me before. He had never heard me before, but that letter from Bud Legg did it for him. So from then on, he got me with Panhandle Sports Broadcasting. And later on, we did some other things. But Panhandle Sports had the rights to broadcast every championship game in every sport. And of course, I don't know if you follow high school sports in Florida, but football is like a million times better than it is anywhere else. In fact, the first football game I ever went to, the opening kickoff, he ran 85 yards for a touchdown. And my wife's sitting in the press box with me, and I'm looking at her, and she's looking at me, and we're going,
we're not in Iowa anymore.
No, we're not. Holy cow. And so I did the state football finals in football, basketball, and they switch them around. Like here, they have football in the Unidome. There, they have football at that time at the Orange Bowl in Orlando. It's since moved away, but and then the basketball would be in Lakeland, and everything was right close to Central Florida where I was. So it made it perfect for me. Then we do basketball, then we do baseball from Vero Beach and softball from Claremont. And we did the state finals in swimming, lacrosse, bowling, just about everything. I didn't do track. Somebody else had been doing that for years, but I did everything else, all the state championships and all the sports, and worked with different people. And then soccer. I don't know if you've ever tried play-by-play in soccer, but you really have to dig into the old memory bank to come up with stuff to fill the time there. But I did that. But you know what the most fun was? The state finals in bowling. That was the most fun I think I ever had down there. It was just tremendous. I mean, we did it at a 100-lane bowling alley. And just the people the noise was just tremendous. And it's just so much fun doing the bowling. And I can't remember his name, but I got a color commentator who was a pro bowler from Tampa who came over and did the play-by-play with me. And, the Florida High School Athletic Association has a lot of pull. My company had a lot of pull because the Florida High School Athletic Association was going to hold the team bowling way down on lanes 50 and 51, and the individuals way down on lanes 90 and 95. But we forced them to move them together so we could broadcast them both at the same time. That's a lot of pull when you can do that.
Yeah.
So that was fun. That was a lot. I did that for a number of years.
Was bowling on the radio, or is this bowling on television?
Yeah, that was on television.
Yeah.
We must have 8 or 9 cameras just angled all over the place, and we'd go over from team, and then we'd quickly go over to the individuals, and they're doing the Baker individual bowling on here, but it just was so much fun because it was hectic all the time. It was hectic. It's not like football. The play's over. Okay, now you got another play. Now the play's over. Now you got another play. But in bowling, this is going on and this is going on. And you got to keep your eyes going both ways. It was quite a challenge. But I really liked that.
I have to say, bowling's not one I've done. I've done swimming. I like swimming. That one's a lot more fun than I thought. When you cover wrestling, I mean, how many times did you cover wrestling? Because you kind of make it sound like the state wrestling tournament in Iowa when you got the 6 and 8 mats going on at the same time. It is action, action, action. Is it similar at all?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. I didn't do wrestling in Florida. I did some in Iowa, but what it's a little different because you concentrate on your school. Your school's on mat 3. You don't care what's going on the other mats at that time, unless you're Iowa City West and you have your entire team there at once and they're on 5 different mats at the same time. But in Florida, you're doing it for the whole state. So you have to concentrate on. So I didn't do that. Somebody else did that and track. I did all the rest of them.
Okay. All right. So you come back to Iowa, you're doing some PA work. You slip in a little bit of play-by-play here and there. You're still doing the oldies show at KCFI. Is that right?
Every Saturday morning. I record them ahead of time. I don't drive up every Saturday because we live in Coralville. Excuse me. So in fact, I went up there yesterday to record the shows for December 4th and December 11th. I try and do that as much as I can because you never know when the winter weather is going to keep you away. And now at least I'm recorded through December 11th. So if we don't have any snows, if we have the snowstorms before then, I've at least covered through that. But I do a countdown show, and I've been doing that since we got back from Florida in 2015 maybe. It's been about 6 years I've been doing it. That's all I do now. I do basketball and volleyball PA for Iowa City West, and I did it for 2 years at Iowa City Liberty High School. But since COVID came, I quit doing that, and because I don't want to be in a crowded gym with all that. And so, but Westside keeps asking, "Are you ready to come back? Are you ready to come back?" Not quite yet. Maybe next season I will, but not right now. But I don't do any play-by-play anymore, which is fine because that's a lot of work.
You've done, if it's 20,000 games or 5,000 games that you said, that's a lot. And the reason I said 20,000 is I understand you have quite a collection of music. Yes, it's right off to the side here. In fact, all the stuff I do at KCFI is off my own stuff. And I know one of the guys at KCFI comes in and says, "Oh, that show you had last week, we don't have this song. We don't have that song." So I've got them. I mean, actually, I've got them going back to 1890. I don't use those, but I've got songs going back to 1890, the John Philip Sousa band, the original band. I got stuff like that. And all the way. In fact, every Tuesday, I check the current charts and I download some stuff from current music too. So it's not just that I'm stuck in the 70s. You mean like Dua Lipa type thing and Taylor Swift? You mean current? Oh, yeah, I've got some Taylor Swift. Yeah, I've got some Jason Mraz and stuff like that. And Stone Temple Pilots. You know, I keep up on that stuff. There's some good stuff to be had. Not as much as there used to be. Right. Music's different. I mean, we could do a whole nother hour or two, I suppose, just on discussing the music industry and how it's changed. The collection of songs, if you had to narrow it down, Kelly, I mean, sports was kind of an accidental and it sounded like a happy accident for a number of years. You always kind of kept in the music. You can only do one. Which one are you going to do? I would do the music thing. When I was at American Forces Radio in Asmara, Ethiopia, Joel Whitburn out of Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, had got a deal going with Billboard magazine where he put together the top 1,000 hits, 1955 up till then 1970. And every radio station got a copy of it. Well, we did too. So I went looking and I found every one of those 1,000 songs. And for however long it took, I started on my Saturday morning show counting down the top 1,000 songs, starting at number 1,000. And I found everything but one. There was only one song I couldn't find, and that was The Limbo Rock by Chubby Checker. I found all of the other 999 songs. So I did it for 6 hours every Saturday, except the last Saturday, when I got down to the last 10 or 12, I couldn't be there because my brother was getting married and I flew back to Iowa. So I had to record it. So I wasn't live for the culmination of the thing, but I recorded it all. That's how I got into programming oldies. Okay. And been doing it ever since. Well, Kelly, is there anything we missed? I mean, your career is incredible in what it spans. And I think we've learned new names and new parts of you. I've seen you from afar and listened to you from afar. It was so glad that we got a chance to talk about a lot. What did I miss?
The very first UNI NCAA basketball tournament appearance, I did that.
For the men or women?
For the men.
Okay.
When it was 1990, Norfolk, Virginia. They played the University of Missouri, who was number 3 in the country at that time, but had lost in the Big 8 tournament and thus were only the number 3 seed. But they had been the number 3 team, or maybe even higher than that, all season long. And so here comes little UNI ranked number 12 or number 12 seed. And of course, UNI beat them, which was and I was able to, I already knew at that time that we were not going to do UNI the next year. So this was it. This was going to be it. And then Maurice Newby hit that 3-pointer, and Missouri had no timeouts left and couldn't get a shot off, and we beat them, and the whole place went goofy and crazy. And the funny thing is, we never thought we'd win. I mean, I'm sure Bob Bowlesby did, and I'm sure the team did, but I didn't think they would. My plane reservation back home was for the next day, as was the newspaper people and everybody who was covering it. So after the game, we had to all go back to the hotel and call the airlines, and now we have to play on Sunday. Well, we were going to go home on Sunday. So now we had to make different reservations, and it was just a hectic time, but it was a lot of fun. That was probably the highlight of the whole play-by-play. I mean, despite the bowling and all that, that was probably the individual highlight of my career was broadcasting that game. And they would have beaten Minnesota if it hadn't been for a guy named Willie Burton, who scored 36 points the next game, went to the NBA and completely flopped. If he hadn't scored 36 points, then they would have gone to the Sweet 16 in New Orleans and played Syracuse or Notre Dame, and no telling, but they've gone there since. But that was my last UNI venture, those 2 games, and that was really a lot of fun.
So that would have been Eldon Miller as the coach.
Eldon Miller
was your analyst.
Yep, he was there. That was his 4th year. It's funny, he got hired. I was doing games. Jim Barry was the coach, may he rest in peace, and he resigned in the middle of the season, but said, I'm going to finish out the season. So they went looking for a new coach. Obviously, they're going to start the search right away. And that was the same year Ohio State fired Eldon Miller we never could figure out why, because they just won the NIT. They didn't make the NCAA, but they won the NIT. So Eldon Miller got hired. And of course, that was a big deal. Then Earl Bruce came from Iowa State.
The Columbus to Cedar Falls connection. I remember that well. Yes.
Columbus West. They called it Columbus West. He came in 1 year, and I was doing the games there. He only stayed the 1 year, and people criticize him a lot, but I don't really, because he got that whole Unidome extension built with the weight rooms and all that, and upgraded everything. Yeah, he left after a year, which really didn't sit well with everyone. But since then, the players all dressed up, they all acted. I mean, he got them through a broadcast class where they had to learn how to be interviewed. Things like that he did, the little things that people never heard about. He did the little things. And I never forget when somebody at the press conference said, Earl, in the Unidome where they have artificial turf, how can you get 3 yards in a cloud of dust? Because that was his big thing at Ohio State. He said, well, are you going to pass more? Because the Unidome's pretty open to pass. He said, 3 things, it's always funny. Only 3 things can happen when you pass the football, and 2 of them are bad. So, but they didn't have a winning season. But I think they were 4 and 5. But the first game I remember was at the University of Pittsburgh, and he scheduled some pretty top-notch teams for non-conference. But he was there a year, and then Terry Allen came in and all that, and then after that we lost the rights to UNI football and basketball, so I didn't do any more of their games. So, but it was fun being there in the Darryl Mudra era.
Yeah. And then then Kurt Warner, did you cover him?
He came right when he was on the team, but he wasn't the quarterback.
Yeah.
So he came into prominence after I had left already. The big quarterback I remember for UNI was Mike Smith. He was named Conference Player of the Year. Mark Farley played then. And now you're testing my memory, because this guy Bryce Pomp.
Yeah, Bryce Pomp from Jefferson.
Yeah, and then he went to the Buffalo Bills, became the NFL Defensive Player of the Year, so he was there. Earl Peebles and people like that. There's some pretty good players. I don't follow it as much as I used to, but I still watch UNI when they're on TV.
All right, last thing, Kelly, how much longer are you going to do all this?
Told my wife I want to do it till I'm 80. So I've got a few years yet. I'm only 72 now.
Okay.
Of course, whether I can make it to 80 is another thing. Had a few health problems, but nothing to keep me down. And I just want to keep doing it as long as I can be productive. As long as people want.
All right, Kelly Neff, I appreciate the time here. This has been the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting Oral History with Mr. Kelly Neff, and we can't even describe him with 2 words. We're going to need a whole truckload of all the stuff he's done. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you very much.